Vogel, our Democratic candidate, and Mark Cole, our Republican candidate. AB, you're going to lead us off. You have. Lie down in the back, guys. And over there on the side, if you want to talk, please go on into the hallway.
All right, the $60,000 question for Mark Cole and Catherine Vogel both is, what distinguishes you really? There's been a lot of conversation about this. You see a lot of Twitter about it. You were in the state attorney's office at the same time. And up until now, we haven't really heard any argument, any real distinguishing statements about how you might differ in terms of leadership and changes that you would like to see in the state attorney's office. So I'd like to hear you speak about that a little bit.
Okay, who do you want to start with? As far as the differences between the two of us, there's not a significant number of differences out there. Catherine, I went and hired her from Miami when I became the state attorney back in 2000. And she worked as my chief assistant for 8 years. One of the reasons that I hired her, and one of the reasons that I kept her around, is because we thought alike. When it comes down to the differences between the two of us, the only thing that I can point to, I've been a resident of Monroe County for 25 years. You've been here for what, going on 12 now, I think, something like that. But that's still a significant period of time. As far as the actual differences between the two of us, I think Monroe County wins either way, whether she's elected or I'm elected.
Would you like me to speak to this?
Yes, Catherine.
Okay, I do believe that there are differences. I mean, to the extent that we will both follow the National District Attorneys Association's recommendations as far as how we speak to the press, I believe that that's true. Mark and I both have a lot of the same experience as far as the number of years that we have been in the state attorney's office, and we both worked our way up. However, one of the things I think that distinguishes us is that I have had the opportunity to go door to door. I've spoken with the people of Monroe County. I have listened to what their concerns are, both especially under Mr. Ward's administration. I can tell you that I believe that I have more of an ability to get out and talk to people individually and to listen to people individually, and I believe that that's a big distinction between the two of us. I do believe, one of the things as a leader that you must do is you must follow the rules, and that I think that we are both going to be doing, following the rules, following the our ethical obligations. However, I believe that I have a unique ability to relate to people, both as a supervisor and also people throughout the county, my constituents, and I think that's probably our biggest difference.
This is a philosophical question about grand juries with a specific emphasis. The grand jury recently, looking into the county's iPod scandal, concluded that the county's top 2 administrators should be fired, yet the grand jury did not indict either of them, even on misdemeanor charges. Do you think, it's a 2-part question, the grand jury was properly convened for the iPod scandal and made the appropriate conclusions based on their report and the evidence before them? And Catherine, we'll start with you.
Okay, I think I was the one who may have quoted a famous defense attorney in Miami that the grand jury is where all political cases go to die. Taking cases to the grand jury, there is a state attorney can almost slough off their responsibility by taking a case to the grand jury. I cannot speak to whether or not this grand jury made the right decision. I certainly wasn't there, and I'm not going to judge what this grand jury did. I do know that as your state attorney, when I see crimes occur, I'm not going to take it to a grand jury unless it's a first-degree murder case, and I'm going to go ahead and indict whether it's a political case or not.
Same question, Mark.
Well, as far as whether or not the grand jury was properly convened, my answer to that is yes. It's actually the duty of the grand jury to investigate the workings of the government. That's one of the things that is read to the grand jury when they're impaneled. Now, you got to keep in mind that there's a grand jury impaneled at all times. So it's not like they were impaneled specifically looking at the island situation. They were there already. The only question is whether or not they were convened correctly as to whether or not they should be looking into that. My answer to that is yes. It's part of the grand jury's job to investigate the workings of government and to be critical of those workings when there are problems. Now, as to whether or not it was done properly, the report came out and the evidence supported what was the allegations that were made. What I saw there was basically a political situation. And there's no doubt that Mr. Ward has a vendetta against Mr. Eskisi. He's tried to work against him and get him out numerous times in the past. That was one of the things that I think helped defeat Mr. Ward in the last election, is the fact that he was doing things that were political. He was alienating individuals, and I think that's one of the reasons that he was defeated during the primary. What I didn't like was the fact that the grand jury told the county commission, here's what you have to do, you have to fire this individual or these individuals. I think that's improper. I think it's proper for the grand jury to criticize those individuals, but to put out what a specific function should be or a specific action should be on behalf of the county commission is substituting the grand jury's opinion for the opinion of the county commissioners, who are the elected officials that are responsible for making that decision. And I think that that was nothing more than a political situation. And everybody here that's familiar with the court system has probably heard the slogan that grand juries can be led around by a prosecutor. So much so that a grand jury can anybody can indict even a ham sandwich with a grand jury.
I would just remind you that Dennis is no longer in this race. So, you both point to the clearance rate of cases going down since Dennis Ward took office 3.5 years ago. What would you do to, and this is about you, get the clearance rate down, and would that indicate you're more open to negotiating fees as opposed to holding up a trial?
I'll start. You mean getting the clearance rate up, I believe. Okay, clear. Probably, yes. I have not been with the state attorney's office, obviously, under Mr. Ward, and I don't know exactly what happened over the past 4 years, but I can tell you that somebody is asleep at the switch, whether they're not negotiating cases, whether cases are not being looked at, and decisions made about whether or not a case is good. And if a case is not good, you need to plead it out, or you need to drop it so that it comes off your docket, or whether or not the assistants are not getting those cases to trial. I can tell you that in my administration, when I come in, the first thing that I'm going to do is take a look at all of those cases that have been pending for a very, very long time, find out exactly why it is that they're not moving, and move those cases. Because, justice delayed is justice denied. It sounds like an old adage, but it certainly is true, especially if you're the victim and you've been waiting for a couple of years to get your case cleared. There's just no excuse for this.
Well, Catherine and I are in agreement on a lot of that. My belief is that somebody was asleep at the wheel. And I think the better way of putting it is that the problem was a lack of supervision. Back when I was the state attorney, I had 3 really good people at the top. There was me, there was Catherine, there was Jeff Overby. And the 3 of us combined had somewhere in the area of around 75 years worth of experience. And then we had Patrick that was in charge of our marathon office, very experienced. We had Don Barrett for a while, and Zargo, people that were really, really good at supervising, people that could look at what was going on with the caseload, and they could tell that there were problems, and they could help address that by doing good supervision of these young attorneys. And I think that's one of the things that Mr. Ward eliminated, was this good supervision that existed in the office. And his theory was that let's take money from these high-paid individuals and redistribute it among the worker bees that are out there handling the majority of the caseload. But what happens when you do that is you lose the supervision. And I believe that's probably one of the biggest reasons that, there's a lack of supervision in the office right now that allows this stuff to go on. Additionally, the way that Mr. Ward handles some of his cases is contributing to that factor. I believe that Mr. Ward's concern with his conviction rate is so great that he is basically creating an atmosphere where his attorneys don't really want to go to trial. What they want to do, if it's a bad case or a case that they're going to have evidentiary difficulties with, they're going to push that off or let the defense attorney push it off without much of an argument. And doing so makes the case languish, and that's part of the clearance rate problem. You end up with a... I'm sorry. Oh, okay. I'm out of time.
Question for both of you. Our outgoing State Attorney Dennis Ward has been very open with the media, talking a lot to us about various different cases. How would that change if you're elected?
Okay. The National District Attorneys, I've said this over and over and over again, that there are certain limitations on what a prosecutor can speak to the press about. There's a concern that when a prosecutor speaks too much to the press, discloses too much to the press, that people's rights, the rights of the accused can be jeopardized. When I went door to door speaking to the people in the community, I heard over and over again that they were surprised and offended by the fact that the current state attorney's office disclosed as much as it did with the press. And one of the things that certainly that we're going to do is that the National District Attorneys Association has specific guidelines about what can be discussed with the press. That being said, I am not going to not speak with the press. I am going to speak with the press as your state attorney, but there are certain limitations on what we can discuss. You will not hear the state attorney's office discussing plea offers, which I still read about in the newspaper just a couple of days ago. I will not have my assistant saying, well, this accused is going to be entering into a plea, because what that does is that jeopardizes their right to a fair trial should they choose to have a trial. There will be things that can be discussed, but we're going to be following the guidelines. We're going to be doing it in an ethical and fair way.
Catherine and I are in agreement on this. The National District Attorneys Association is a very well-educated group of individuals. Prosecutors from throughout the United States got together, met, and came up with a series of guidelines for dealing with numerous different types of functions involving prosecutors' offices, and dealing with the media was one of those. And they put forth guidelines. Now, keep in mind, of course, they are just guidelines. They're not, ethical rules that we have to follow, but they're ethical rules that we should follow. And I'm in agreement with Catherine. We should be following those rules. They were put together for a reason, and it's usually a very well-reasoned purpose behind them. And she's exactly right. The discussion this morning, I think it was in today's newspaper, I read about a potential plea on somebody that had done a number of burglaries out there. Now, that individual, when he comes in front of a jury, is that individual going to receive a fair trial when everybody in town has read the newspaper and has already realized that he's basically confessing his guilt? But if the plea doesn't go through and they end up in a trial situation, he's already starting off with, an unfair trial. And that's not what our system's about. Our system's about seeing that justice is done, and that's the main job of the prosecutor. And I believe that when you're doing things like discussing a defendant's confession or the possibility of plea negotiations, that you're not doing justice. And I would follow the National District Attorneys Association guidelines also.
Okay, that's it for our time. Thank you, guys.